Job chapter 16. Here Job gets to answer Eliphaz once again. We talked about last week how that started round 2 of the friends' conversation with Job, and they went through Eliphaz, then Bildad, then Zophar, then Eliphaz got to go again. And we also talked specifically last week about how this conversation that they're having is heating up with each pass of the friends, and Job's response, it's getting more and more intense, and that will continue. But here Job gets to answer the accusations that he is suffering because he is so evil and has sinned so against God. And we've talked about that many times throughout this study so far. The last few back and forths that we've had, that they've sort of accused each other of saying stuff that everybody already knows. So he responds to Eliphaz, I've heard of all of that before. You're not presenting anything new to me. And then he adds this tag to it, you are miserable comforters. I thought you were here to comfort me in my sorrow and in my pain, and instead you've increased it. And so if you're here to comfort me, you're doing a terrible job at it. And such was the case. They were terrible at it. So he says, shall windy words have an end? Or what provokes you that you should answer? When he just wants this conversation to end, but he feels each time that he has to respond to what's being said about him, as any of us would want to defend our character when baseless charges are being brought against us, especially out of such misunderstanding from his friends. They're wrong in what they believe. And so Job, has this problem on 2 fronts. One, they're accusing him of something that he is not or has not done, and also they're very wrong about God. So Job has to defend himself and God in this. And so he wants them to just stop responding to him. What provokes you that you answer me? Just let me speak, and then let's end this conversation. It's not going to end, though. It's going to continue. He tells them, let's switch places here for a moment. If you are the one who is in pain and had lost everything, and I'm sitting on the other side here to comfort you, I could do exactly what you've done. I could tear you down with my words. I could, heap up words against you. I could shake my head at you. But instead, I would strengthen you with what I had to say. I would encourage you. I'd build you up. It says, the solace of my lips would assuage your pain. What I would have to say with you would make you feel better rather than worse. So Job says, that's what I would do. Why don't you do that? Well, that's because of their misunderstanding of Job and God. It says if I speak, I'm still in just as much pain, but if I'm silent, I'm still in just as much pain. So it's whether he speaks or doesn't is not really helping his pain one way or the other. And so he's decided to speak. That they wanted him to be quiet and to stop saying the things that he's saying. But he refuses to do that. He's going to continue to answer. He's going to continue to speak about these things and try to reason with them and come to a understanding, because Job is confused. Job doesn't know what's going on. His friends believe that they do, but Job understands that he doesn't understand. He doesn't know what's going on, and so he's trying to find an answer. He's trying to put out his thoughts on the matter out there and see if maybe his friends could help him to understand, because he knows what they're saying is wrong. He knows that's not right. And so what is? And so he goes on with why he's confused. God has, turned against him. God has worn me out. He has made desolate all my company. He shriveled me up, or gave me wrinkles, I think is what the King James Version says. Those wrinkles are a witness against me. My leanness has risen up against me. And so, Job is wasting away. And he believes that God is behind what's happening to him. And so he speaks of God in this way. Why has he targeted me? He's torn me in his wrath. He hated me. Now, we have to understand that Job knows that God doesn't hate him in the sense that we think of hate. But sometimes it means love less, and so it's talking about how God has turned away from Job. Turned what was once blessing, now it seems to be a curse. And why has he done that? He gnashed his teeth at me. Speaking about his perceived anger against Job. And so, Job's going to continue to talk about these things and try to find some sort of understanding of why these things are happening. Now, this is mostly speaking figuratively about how God has turned on him. But in verse 10, men have gaped at me with their mouth. They have struck me instantly on the cheek. They massed themselves together against me. And so man has turned against me in the context under the direction of God. That they have turned to attack Job. Of course, some of his loss was due to natural disaster, and some of it was from people coming and killing his animals and taking his stuff. And so here he is, in ultimate suffering, and some of that at the hands of others. And then he returns to God in verse 11. God gives me up to the ungodly and casts me into the hands of the wicked. That's the follow-up to verse 10, that, men have turned against me because God has, directed them to do so. I was at ease, and he broke me apart. And of course, we return back to the first chapter, and we understand, Job was at ease. Everything was going great for Job. He had this wonderful family. He had all kinds of wealth, power, prestige. So much that Satan accused God of putting a hedge around Job and giving him everything he ever wanted and needed. And, he couldn't get to him through all the stuff that God had blessed him with. But that's all gone now. God has taken all of that and, and has seized him. He seized me by the neck and dashed me to pieces. He set me up as his target. So, or once he was the target of God's blessings, now he is the target of God's wrath. And so once again, we understand that Job has a misunderstanding of what's going on here. It's not God that targeted Job, it's Satan that targeted Job. But Job hadn't looked behind the scenes to see that. He couldn't. Fortunately, we have. His archers surround me. He slashes upon my kidneys and does not spare. He pours out my gall on the ground. By the way, whenever you read the word reigns in the Old Testament King James Version, it's generally talking about the kidneys. And he said he slashed them open without any care for Job. He doesn't spare. He slashed them open, and his gall poured out. It's very vivid imagery that he's getting in using here in these verses. You think much of this is a comparison to war, and so you have this walled city, and then a vast army coming against that walled city, and they're breaking down the wall one right after the other. There's breaks in the wall here and there's breaks in the wall there, and so when you're inside, you don't know which break in the wall that you're going to defend. And it says, and he runs upon me like a warrior. And so, of course, they would break down the walls, and then, as many troops as would run through those cracks to get into the city. That's the imagery that's being given to us here. And so God is tearing him down and easily defeating him. And then he goes on to describe his physical condition. I've sewed sackcloth upon my skin. I've laid my strength in the dust. There's no hope of ever getting better in Job's eyes. This is his life now. It's a life of continual pain and agony and misery. My face is red with weeping. So on my eyelids is deep darkness. So you've seen somebody who's very, very sick and how their eyes sort of get sunken in and the dark circles around the eyes. That's what he's describing for us here. Although there is no violence in my hands and my prayer is pure. So through all these verses, his friends were probably sitting there listening to him and saying, that's right, he has. God surely has done that to you. Now will you repent? Will you repent? But Job gets to the end of that little section where he's talking about what God has done to him. He said, but I haven't done anything to deserve this. There's no violence in my hands. God has turned violence against me, but I have not committed violence myself. This is not retribution for my violence. I'm not reaping what I have sown. My prayer has been pure. So he's once again left with, why is this happening? He doesn't know. Interesting thought that Job has given to us here. He doesn't want his suffering to be covered up. He wants it to be seen, not only from man, but also by God. Because he says, even now my witness is in heaven. He who testifies for me is on high. I believe this is a reference to the advocate that he is going to have in Christ, as he has spoken of already and will speak of more later on. He has one who's going to testify on his behalf. My friends scorn me, but my eye pours out tears to God. So he's not looking for comfort from his friends. His friends can't do anything about his suffering. He is crying toward God, that God would rise up and do something about that. He says that he would argue the case of a man with God, a son of man does with his neighbor. Once again, he desires to have this conversation with God. And he's talked about that in every single one of his responses to his friends, that he wishes that he could just have this conversation with God, and that if he couldn't, someone could have this conversation with God on his behalf. And later on, he's going to get that opportunity, and it's going to be silent. For when a few years have come, I shall go the way from which I shall not return. Death's on its way. It's not going to be long in Job's mind. Of course, it's going to be quite a while, but he doesn't know that at the time. Where the King James Version says breath, it's spirit. Of course, breath and spirit are the same word. My spirit is broken. We talk about horses that when they're unbroken and wild, that they're very spirited. And then you have to break them if they're to be domesticated. My spirit is broken. My days are extinct. The graveyard is ready for me. So Job sees nothing in his future but death. That's what's coming, and he just has to continue in this time for a little while longer where it's just intense pain and agony, and then death's going to come. But for that time, he's surrounded by mockers, by people who don't seem to be on his side, who seem to be relishing the pain and agony that he's going through. And so he says, my eye dwells on their provocation. That this is what I get to look at for the rest of my days, are these friends mocking me and calling me this terrible sinner while speaking out of ignorance. So make a deal with me. Lay down a pledge for me with you. Who is there who will put up security for me? Who's gonna stand up for me and vouch for me? You have closed your eyes, closed your hearts rather, to understanding. Therefore, you will not let them triumph. He who informs against his friends to get a share of their property. It seems that maybe Job's making an accusation of his own here against his friends. Why are his friends so set against him? He who informs against his friends to get a share of their property. Are they after what Job had? I don't know. But they're not going to prosper in this and turning themselves against Job. Job is a byword of the people. He's something that's sort of mocked at and disregarded. He's one before whom men spit. All right, so and I believe here he's referring to the treatment he is receiving at the hands of his friends. But it's possible that others, having not really been in close to the situation with Job, but knows that he's lost everything, knows that he's in such terrible health. What are the people in the towns talking about with Job? This was the common belief, what his friends are saying, that people who suffer so greatly are evil and cursed by God. And so it's probably the case that, the people in general had turned their thoughts about Job, that he must be some sort of awful sinner for this to happen. But he says his eye has grown dim from vexation, and all my members are like a shadow. He's mentally exhausted and confused, and physically he's worn out. But he says the upright are appalled at this. He who has the innocent stirs himself up against the godless. Said those who are upright and have an understanding of God know that this is not right. They know that Job is not suffering because of his evil, and would not go on with that idea. The righteous holds to his way, and as a result, he who has clean hands will go stronger and stronger. But Job is, of course, confused as to why he seems to be growing weaker and weaker. You come on again, all of you. I shall not find a wise man among you. That's a pretty interesting thing for Job to say about his friends. You don't have wisdom. All right, you're trying to be wise. You think that you have everything figured out, but I have not found any wisdom in anything that you've said. So I'm not going to find a wise man among you. But then he continues, my days are past. My plans are broken off, the desires of my heart. When all this happened to Job, I'm sure he had great plans for what he was going to do with the rest of his life. People don't just cut off dreaming and wanting things and making plans for their futures when they're in Job's condition. When he was wealthy and had everything, he still had plans. He still had desires. There are things that he was going to do, but all those they're gone now. He cannot envision a world where he is even remotely returned to where he was. Now that's going to turn out to be a false idea in Job, because he is going to have a future and he is going to grow, and we're going to see that at the end of the book. But in the darkness that he's in right now, he can see nothing else. And so he says, they make night into day. The light, they say, is near to darkness. Everything is turned on its head in Job's life. And he doesn't know what to think about any of it. This is generally describing a sense of great despair and hopelessness. If I hope for Sheol or the grave as my new home, as my house, if I make my bed in darkness, if I say that the pit where he's going to be buried is my father, the worm that's going to eat me, my mother or my sister, where is my hope? This is what's coming, death. And so what do I have to live for now? Where is my hope? Who can see my hope? Go down to the grave and try to find my hope, because that's where I'm going. What hope is there for me? Will it go down to the bars or the gates of Sheol, the grave? Shall we descend together into the dust, searching for anything good that Job has to look forward to in life? The answer is, well, there's nothing. He is utterly hopeless and in despair. Of course, he is speaking about his feelings on the matter as it stood in that moment, not looking past this life to the great reward that's past this life, and what God is going to do for him at the end of this book.